The cold mud of the forest floor was a familiar comfort. It was honest, at least. It did not pretend to be anything other than what it was: dirt and decay, the end of things. For Nessa, it felt like home. Her pack, the Stonecreek pack, had cast her out 3 days ago. The Alpha's words still echoed in the hollow space behind her ribs, a vicious, rattling percussion. Wolfless, broken, unwanted. She had never shifted. 20 years she had lived among them, a constant, walking shame. Other children had met their inner wolves at 13, 14, 15. They had returned from their first run with eyes glowing, drunk on the wild magic of the moon. Nessa had only ever returned with scraped knees and the bitter taste of failure in her mouth. Her designated mate, Liam, a brawny, thoughtless warrior, had endured their pairing for years out of duty. But on the night of the mating moon, before the entire pack, he had renounced her. He had pointed a trembling, furious finger at her and declared her an empty vessel, a curse upon his line. The pack had roared its agreement. Her alpha, a cruel man named Gregor, had seized the opportunity to excise the blight he'd long despised. He had stripped her of her name, her thin blanket, the worn leather shoes on her feet. Barefoot and clad in a threadbare shift, she was exiled, banished to the neutral lands between territories, where rogues and predators hunted. It was a death sentence delivered with a self-righteous sneer. Now, hunger was a living thing inside her, a creature with claws and teeth, tearing at the lining of her stomach. Her vision swam. A light drizzle began to fall, chilling her to the bone. She huddled at the base of an ancient oak, its gnarled roots a poor shelter. This was it then. This was how she would end. Not in a blaze of glory, not in the warm comfort of a den, but shivering and starving in the unforgiving wilderness. A ghost even before she was dead. A sound broke the quiet misery of the forest. Hoofbeats, dozens of them, heavy and rhythmic, accompanied by the jangle of bridles and the low murmur of voices. It was a sound of power, of wealth and authority. She pressed herself tighter against the tree, trying to become one with the bark and shadows. Such a procession could only mean one thing: a high-ranking pack on the move, or royalty. Through the mist-shrouded trees, they emerged. A column of immense warriors on horseback, their banners a stark black wolf's head against a field of silver. The royal guard. And at their center, riding a warhorse the color of midnight, was a figure that stole the very breath from her lungs. He was colossal, a being carved from the mountain heart, with shoulders so broad they seemed to strain the seams of his fine leather tunic. His dark hair was swept back from a severe, unforgiving face, and even from this distance she could feel the crushing weight of his presence. It was an aura of absolute, undisputed authority. It was Thane, the Alpha King. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of her hunger. The king was traveling to her former pack's territory. She knew of the tensions, the border disputes Gregor had foolishly instigated. The king was coming to pass judgment, and she was caught in his path, a trespasser, an outcast with no one to speak for her. Before she could force her trembling limbs to move, to crawl deeper into the woods, a scout broke from the column and pointed directly at her. "My king! A rogue in the trees!" The entire procession halted. Silence descended, thick and suffocating. The king's head turned, and his gaze, a burning, piercing gold, locked onto her. The world didn't just stop, it shattered. The air was ripped from her lungs, replaced by a scent that was impossibly, primally familiar. Thunderstorms and pine, ancient stone and something fiercely, devastatingly male. A visceral pull, like a physical cord, yanked at her very soul, demanding she move toward him. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, overwhelming silence of his arrival. What was happening? This was not fear. This was something else entirely, something terrifying and magnetic and utterly consuming. Just as the king began to dismount, another party crashed through the undergrowth. It was Alpha Gregor and his personal guard, clearly rushing to intercept the royal procession. Gregor's face was a mask of strained servility, which curdled into pure fury when he saw Nessa. "Your Majesty!" Gregor called out, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched his horse's neck. "Forgive this intrusion. We were not expecting you so soon." His eyes flicked to Nessa, full of venom. "This filth? She is nothing, a cast-out from my pack. I will have her dealt with immediately, a disgrace we should have cleansed long ago." He gestured to two of his warriors. "Kill it." The command was stark, brutal. The two wolves dismounted, their own eyes glowing with grim satisfaction. They had tormented her for years. This would be a pleasure for them. Nessa squeezed her eyes shut, a single hot tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. So this was the end. Torn apart for the crime of being seen. "Stop." The word was not shouted. It was a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the very soil. It was the sound of a landslide, of a glacier cracking in half. It was pure command. The two Stonecreek wolves froze instantly, their bodies locked in place as if turned to stone. Even Alpha Gregor flinched, his head snapping up in shock. King Thane swung his leg over his massive warhorse, landing on the forest floor with a soft thud that seemed to shake the ground. He didn't look at Gregor. He didn't look at anyone. His molten gold eyes were fixed on Nessa, and in their depths, a tempest raged. It was a storm of disbelief, of fury, of a longing so profound it was terrifying to witness. He started walking toward her, each step deliberate, powerful. The air crackled around him, thick with an energy that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. He moved past the frozen warriors. He walked right past the stunned, groveling Alpha Gregor. He ignored the shocked gasps of his own royal guard. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she had to crane her neck back to see his face. He was a mountain of a man, eclipsing the gray sky. The scent of him was overwhelming, a dizzying perfume of power and pine that made her want to weep. And then he did the impossible. Thane, the Alpha King, ruler of all packs, a man before whom alphas groveled and enemies trembled, sank to one knee in the wet, cold mud. He knelt before her, before the outcast, before the broken, wolfless girl. His voice, when he spoke, was a raw, aching rumble that seemed to come from the center of the earth. It was for her alone, yet the entire forest seemed to hold its breath to listen. "You were cast out for having no wolf." His gaze held hers, a universe of burning gold. "I am the Alpha King, and I kneel before you because every wolf in my bloodline has been howling your name since the dawn of our kind. Mine." The word wasn't spoken, but it slammed into her consciousness like a physical blow, a possessive, undeniable brand seared onto her soul. It was his voice, his thought, inside her head. The world tilted on its axis. Gregor choked on a gasp. The king's beta, a hard-faced man named Beck, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, but Nessa could only see the king kneeling at her feet, the king whose eyes promised devotion and destruction in equal, terrifying measure. He reached out, his large, calloused hand hesitating for a moment, before gently brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. The touch was electric, a jolt of pure, searing heat that shot through her entire body, chasing away the cold that had settled in her bones. For the first time in 3 days, she wasn't cold. She was burning. Thane's gaze swept over her shivering frame. The thin shift, the mud-caked feet. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of pure, predatory fury. It wasn't directed at her. It was for those who had hurt her. He looked over his shoulder, his golden eyes now chips of ice, pinning Alpha Gregor to the spot. "You cast out my mate," he snarled, the words laced with a power that made Gregor physically recoil. "You left her to starve. You ordered her death." Thane rose to his full, intimidating height. "Your pack is forfeit. Your life is mine to decide." He shrugged off his own heavy, fur-lined cloak, and with a gentleness that was utterly at odds with the violence in his voice, wrapped it around Nessa's shoulders. It was heavy and warm, saturated with his scent. It felt like a shield. It felt like a cage. She was drowning in him, in the reality-altering gravity of his presence. "Beck," Thane commanded, his voice returning to its iron authority. "Take the Stonecreek Alpha and his guards into custody. Secure their lands. We ride for the Citadel." He turned back to Nessa, his expression softening almost imperceptibly as he looked at her. He scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. The world spun, a dizzying kaleidoscope of forest canopy and gray sky, before settling. She was pressed against the hard wall of his chest, his heartbeat a steady, powerful rhythm against her ear. "I have you," he murmured, the words a possessive rumble against her skin. She should have been terrified. A part of her was. She was a prisoner, claimed by a king she did not know, a man whose power was a living, breathing force of nature. But another part of her, a part she hadn't known existed, a deep and ancient core of her being, settled. The gnawing hunger in her stomach was still there, but the deeper ache, the soul-deep loneliness she had carried her entire life, was receding. It was being filled by the heat of his body, the thunder of his heart, the impossible truth of his words. The journey to the Citadel was a blur. Cradled in Thane's arms on his warhorse, wrapped in the suffocating warmth of his cloak, Nessa drifted in and out of a dazed consciousness. The rhythmic movement, the sheer exhaustion, and the bewildering shock of the last hour or so conspired to pull her under. She was vaguely aware of the fortress looming on the horizon, a jagged crown of black stone piercing the clouds, a place of legend she had only heard of in whispers. It looked less like a home and more like a weapon. She was carried through massive gates, across a courtyard filled with stunned guards, and into the heart of the keep. The air inside was different, ancient and charged with power. She was taken up a winding stone staircase into a suite of rooms that were larger than the entirety of the hovel she had grown up in. A fire roared in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on walls hung with rich tapestries. The bed was a mountain of furs and soft linens. Thane set her down on the edge of the bed, with a reverence that felt utterly alien. For a moment, he just looked at her, his golden eyes searching her face. The raw possessiveness was still there, but it was mingled with a confusion that almost mirrored her own. "Food, water," he commanded to the air, and moments later, servants scurried in with trays of bread, cheese, roasted meat, and a pitcher of clean water. They set it down and fled, not daring to meet their king's intense gaze. He knelt before her again, this time on a plush rug. He broke off a piece of bread, and held it to her lips. She flinched. No one had ever shown her such a gesture. Kindness in her life had always been a precursor to pain. "Eat," he said, his voice softer now, but still a command. "You are starving." Hesitantly, she took it. The bread was soft, the taste explosive on her deprived tongue. She ate it ravenously, and he gave her more, along with sips of water. He watched her, his expression unreadable, as she slowly, carefully, began to replenish her strength. When she could eat no more, she leaned back, her head spinning. An elderly woman entered the room then, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes a sharp, intelligent gray. She bowed her head to Thane. "My king." "Iona," he acknowledged. "She is my mate. She is weak. See to her." The healer, Iona, approached Nessa with a calm, steady presence. Her hands were gentle as she examined Nessa's feet, tutting at the cuts and bruises. She cleaned them with a warm, herbal-scented water that soothed the stinging pain. "He is right, you know," Iona said in a low, conspiratorial voice as Thane stood by the fire, his back to them, affording them a sliver of privacy. "About the bond." "I don't understand," Nessa whispered, her voice hoarse. I'm nothing. I'm wolfless." "Hush, child." Iona's gaze was kind but firm. "The bond is a truth deeper than the body. His wolf knew you the moment he saw you. It is a connection of the soul. An incomplete bond, however." She sighed, glancing at the king's rigid posture. "It is agony. For him, right now, it is like having his soul torn in half. Every moment you are near, but unclaimed, is a torment. It can drive an alpha mad." The king's madness could break a kingdom. She had heard the stories. Crops would fail. Wolves would turn feral. The sky itself would seem to weep. The health of the Alpha King was the health of the realm, and she was apparently the key to it. The thought was terrifying. "Why?" Nessa asked, her voice trembling. "Why me?" Thane turned from the fire, his face a mask of grim determination. "Because you are not what you think you are." He crossed the room and stood over her, a formidable shadow. "There are legends, old lore the packs have forgotten. They speak of bloodlines that run parallel to ours. Not wolf, but something other. Something that complements our power." He crouched, bringing his face level with hers. His intensity was a physical force. They were called luminaries, beings of light and life. They could soothe the rage of a wolf, heal the land, and amplify an alpha's strength tenfold. They didn't shift into wolves because their magic was of a different nature, a purer nature. It was said they were all hunted to extinction centuries ago. Nessa stared at him, her mind reeling. A luminary? Her? The broken girl? The outcast? It was absurd. It was a fairy tale. "That's not me," she said, shaking her head. "I'm just me. Nessa. I'm nobody." "No," he growled, his hand clenching into a fist at his side. "You are the reason your old pack's lands were unusually fertile, despite their poor management. You are the reason plants seem to flourish where you walk. You are the reason I feel like my soul has finally found its anchor after a lifetime at sea." His eyes burned with a fervent conviction. "You have been hiding in plain sight, and your ignorant pack was too blind to see the miracle before them. It was too much. The starvation, the exile, the king, the bond, the legends. It was all a towering wave of impossibility crashing down on her. She began to tremble, not from cold, but from sheer, overwhelming shock. I need to think, she stammered, pulling the heavy cloak tighter around herself. A flicker of something. Disappointment? Pain? Crossed his face before it was shuttered away behind the mask of the king. Fine, he said, his voice clipped. You will rest. You are safe here. No one will harm you. He stood and strode to the door. But understand this, Nessa. You are mine. Whether you believe it or not, whether you accept it or not, that is a truth that will not change. He left, the heavy oak door closing behind him with a definitive thud. Nessa was left alone in the opulent room with the crackling fire and the impossible weight of a crown she had never asked for. Safe? She felt more trapped than ever before. She was a prize, a legend, a solution to a king's problem. But she was not Nessa. No one had ever just seen Nessa. The days that followed were a strange purgatory of luxury and confinement. She had soft clothes, endless food, and the solicitous care of Iona. She even had a familiar face. Thane had sent his guards to retrieve her only childhood friend, Kate, from the chaos of the disbanded Stonecreek pack. Kate's arrival was a balm to Nessa's frayed nerves, a small piece of her old life that hadn't been erased. A king, Nessa! The Alpha King, Kate whispered, her eyes wide as she helped Nessa brush her hair. He knelt for you. The whole realm is talking about it. He thinks I'm some kind of magical creature, Kate, Nessa confessed, her voice low. A luminary. Kate paused. Well, remember how my mother's rose bush was dying, and you sat by it all afternoon, and the next day it had a new bud? That was a coincidence. And the time you fell and cut your knee open, and it was barely a scratch an hour later? I heal fast. No one heals that fast, Kate said softly. Maybe he's not wrong. The thought was a seed of doubt planted in the barren ground of her disbelief. While she was sequestered in her tower, Thane was forced to contend with the political storm his actions had created. He had claimed a wolfless outcast, dismantled an established pack, and imprisoned its alpha without trial. The Council of High Alphas was in an uproar. He was forced to leave the Citadel for 3 days to meet with them on neutral ground, to impose his will and quell the dissent. The moment his presence left the fortress, Nessa felt it. It was a sudden, hollowing emptiness, a phantom limb gone missing. A dull ache started behind her eyes, a constant throbbing pressure that mirrored the anxiety churning in her gut. The bond, Iona had called it, incomplete, torn. The first night he was gone, she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in the massive bed, the silence of the room pressing in on her. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were not her own. She dreamt of a great hall filled with snarling, angry men, their faces contorted with rage. She felt a cold, imperious fury that was not hers, a desire to rip out the throat of a particularly vocal alpha with silver-streaked hair. She felt Thane's anger, his frustration, his iron control warring with the feral instincts of his wolf. She woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat, his emotions still clinging to her like a shroud. Driven by a restless energy she couldn't explain, she began to explore. She found the Citadel's library, a vast, circular chamber filled with thousands of scrolls and leather-bound tomes. An ancient, scholarly wolf was the keeper, and he looked at her with undisguised awe. "The king's mate," he breathed, bowing low. "How may I serve you?" I want to read about the luminaries," she said, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. He led her to a dusty, forgotten corner of the library. There, on a high shelf, was a single, massive book bound in what looked like white deerskin, its title written in faded golden ink. The Song of Light. For hours, she sat and read. The text was archaic, the language poetic, but the descriptions were chillingly precise. It spoke of a bloodline that carried the sun's heart within them. It described their inability to access the beast form of the wolf because their magic was one of creation, not transformation. It spoke of their innate ability to heal, to nurture life, to bring balance to the raw, chaotic power of the shifters. A single tear traced its way down her cheek as she read a passage describing how a luminary's touch could make a barren field bloom. She thought of her mother's dead rosebush. The book also contained a warning. Because their power was a source of life, it could be consumed. A dark ritual existed that would allow a wolf to devour a luminary's essence, granting them immense power but twisting them into a monstrous abomination. The luminaries had not been hunted to extinction for sport. They had been devoured for their power. A cold dread washed over her. Was this why Thane wanted her? To use her? The thought was a venomous barb in her heart. He returned on the third day, late in the evening. The ache in Nessa's head, which had become a pounding migraine, vanished the instant his presence entered the citadel's walls. The bond thrummed, a low, resonant hum that was both a comfort and a torment. She found herself drawn to the gardens, a lush, moonlit space within the fortress walls. He found her there, standing by a fountain, the moonlight turning her simple gown to silver. He looked exhausted. The iron mask of the king was gone, replaced by a profound weariness. The lines around his eyes were deeper, and the golden glow of his irises was dimmed. The separation had taken a greater toll on him than he would ever admit. "Nessa," he said, his voice rough. She turned to face him, clutching the knowledge from the book like a shield. "Did you do it?" she asked. "Did you crush your counsel into submission?" He gave a tired, humorless smile. "They are alphas. They do not crush, but they listen to reason when it is backed by sufficient threat." He stepped closer, his gaze intense. "The ache. Did you feel it?" "I had a headache," she said evasively. "It was more than that," he insisted, his voice dropping to a low, intimate growl. "It was a blade twisting in my gut for 3 days. It was the howl of my wolf, screaming your name across the mountains. It was a madness I have only read about. Do you have any idea what it is like to have half of your soul ripped away from you?" He stopped before her, his massive frame seeming to tremble with a barely contained emotion. For the first time she saw not the all-powerful king, but a man in agony, a man terrified. "I have spent my entire life in control," he confessed, his voice raw with a vulnerability that stunned her. "Control of my pack, my kingdom, my wolf. But with you, I have no control. My wolf wants to claim you, to mark you, to bind you to me so completely that we can never be separated again. And I am afraid. Not of my enemies, not of war. I am afraid of you walking away. I am afraid of you rejecting me, because I know with a certainty that terrifies me that it would not just break me, it would shatter me into dust." His confession hung in the cool night air, a fragile, glittering thing. He was laying his power, his sanity, his very soul at her feet. It wasn't about a legend or a magical creature. It was about her. Nessa, the woman who was his other half. The fear in her heart began to recede, replaced by a fragile, burgeoning warmth. He wasn't going to use her. He needed her. Before she could answer, before she could voice the hesitant hope blooming in her chest, a new element entered the tense silence. A scent on the wind. Unfamiliar. Hostile. The scent of strange wolves. Thane's head snapped up, a feral snarl instantly replacing his vulnerable expression. His eyes blazed with their full, molten gold fury. "They're inside the walls!" Suddenly, shadows detached themselves from the edges of the garden. Figures clad in dark leather, their eyes glowing with a predatory light. There were at least a dozen of them, moving with a silent, coordinated deadliness. At their head was a man with a cruel, handsome face and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. Nessa recognized him from whispers and warnings in her old pack, Alpha Marcus of the Blackwood Pack, a ruthless, ambitious alpha known for his brutality. "Thane," Marcus purred, his eyes flicking from the king to Nessa with a covetous gleam. "I heard you'd found yourself a little treasure. I'd negotiated for her with Gregor, you know. He was going to give her to me. You stole what was mine." Thane pushed Nessa behind him, his body a solid wall of muscle. "She was never yours. She was never anyone's to be given." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong," Marcus said with a chilling smile. "She is a thing of power, and power belongs to those strong enough to take it." He lunged, not at Thane but toward the archway where Kate had just appeared, drawn by the commotion. "Kate, run!" Nessa screamed, but it was too late. Marcus's warriors engaged Thane's royal guard, who were just now pouring into the garden, and the space erupted into a maelstrom of snarling wolves and clashing steel. In the confusion, Marcus seized Kate, holding a wicked-looking blade to her throat. "The girl for the luminary," Marcus snarled at Thane, who was frozen, his wolf raging but unable to risk Kate's life. "A fair trade." Panic and a white-hot rage unlike anything she had ever felt surged through Nessa. They were going to kill Kate, her friend, the only person who had ever been kind to her without wanting something. The helplessness, the fear, it all coalesced into a single, defiant point of light deep within her. No. As Marcus tightened his grip on Kate, preparing to use her as a shield to approach Nessa, something inside Nessa snapped. It wasn't a thought. It was an instinct to protect. A desperate, primal scream of her soul. A wave of brilliant, warm light erupted from her body. It wasn't a flash. It was a sustained, silent explosion of pure energy. It slammed into Marcus, throwing him backward as if he'd been struck by a battering ram. He landed in a heap 10 feet away, his arm smoking where the light had touched him. The blade clattered uselessly to the stone path. Kate scrambled away, sobbing in terror. The garden fell silent. The fighting stopped. Friend and foe alike stared, mesmerized and terrified, at the girl who was now glowing with a soft, golden luminescence. The surge of power was a siren call through the mate bond. Thane felt it not as a thought, but as a supernova in his soul. A wave of pure, untamed life force mingled with her terror. He had been in a council meeting in the main keep, the doors barred, laying down the law to a recalcitrant alpha. The moment her power flared, he didn't hesitate. He didn't use the door. He exploded. His transformation was instantaneous and violent. The sound of rending flesh and snapping bone was drowned out by a roar of pure, possessive fury. The oaken council doors, reinforced with iron, were blown off their hinges as a creature of shadow and rage burst forth. His wolf form was immense, larger than any living wolf, a nightmare of black fur and muscle with eyes like burning coals. He moved not like an animal, but like a force of nature, a living earthquake tearing through the stone corridors of his own fortress. He reached the garden in seconds, a black blur of annihilation. He saw Nessa, glowing, beautiful, and terrified. He saw the scorched Alpha Marcus staggering to his feet. He saw the enemy wolves, their eyes wide with shock. And his rage, the protective fury of a king and a mate, boiled over. He fell upon them not as a warrior, but as a storm. Claws like razors tore through leather and flesh. Jaws that could snap steel closed on a Blackwood wolf's neck. It was not a fight. It was a slaughter. Marcus, scorched and reeling, stared at Nessa with a new, horrified understanding. A luminary, he breathed, the word a curse. He knew the legends. He knew what she was now, and the greed in his eyes became manic. He had to have her. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the carnage around him, and grabbed Kate again. The girl shrieked as he pressed the blade back to her throat, this time with the desperation of a cornered animal. "Call off your beast!" Marcus screamed at Nessa, gesturing with his head toward the whirlwind of death that was Thane. "Or the friend dies, I swear it!" Thane's wolf froze mid-kill, a low, guttural snarl vibrating from its massive chest. He could not move. He could not risk it. The sight of his mate's friend in danger, the scent of her fear, held him paralyzed. Nessa's light faded, her power receding with her control. She was just a girl again, facing an impossible choice. Thane, her king, her mate, a force of destruction held in check. Kate, her friend, her sister in all but blood, seconds from death. "Let her go, Marcus," Nessa said, her voice shaking but clear. "Take me instead." "Nessa, no!" Thane's voice was a desperate roar in her mind, a frantic plea through the bond. "A wise choice," Marcus sneered, his eyes glittering with triumph. He shoved Kate roughly to the ground. "Walk to me, slowly." She took a step, then another. Each one was an eternity. She could feel Thane's agony through the bond, a tearing, helpless rage that threatened to rip him apart. He was the Alpha King, and he was powerless. She had to do this. For Kate. For him. She was 5 feet from Marcus when he lunged. He wasn't going to just take her. He was going to claim her, to bite her, to try and steal the power that was now awakened within her. His jaws opened, fangs elongating, aiming for the soft flesh of her shoulder. In that split second, time seemed to slow. She saw his crazed eyes, felt the heat of his breath. She felt Kate's sob and Thane's soul-shattering roar of denial. And she felt the bond, not as a chain, but as an anchor. A deep, unbreakable connection to the magnificent, furious creature across the garden. His love, his terror, his strength, it all poured into her, and the universe within her answered. It was not a flare of light this time. It was the birth of a star. A column of pure, blinding golden energy erupted from her, not outward, but upward, turning the night sky to day. The power was immense, terrifying, a raw creative force that had no place in the mortal world. It was too much. It was burning her from the inside out, threatening to incinerate her very soul. She screamed, not in fear, but in agony, as the light threatened to consume her. "I am losing myself." The thought was a desperate cry to Thane. He did not hesitate. Ignoring the blinding radiance that seared at his eyes, he charged. He broke through the wall of light, a shadow diving into the heart of a sun. He reached her, his massive paws finding purchase on the shaking ground. He didn't try to stop the power. He didn't try to control it. He simply pressed his massive form against her, anchoring her to the world. I have you, Nessa. His voice was a rock in the hurricane of light. I am here. We are together. His presence, his unwavering belief in her, gave her a focal point. The raging inferno of her power found a channel. She was no longer just a vessel. She was a conduit. She looked at Marcus, who was shielded by his hands, his face a mask of abject terror and greed. She didn't feel hatred. She felt a profound pity. She focused the light. It wasn't a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of truth. A wave of pure, unadulterated judgment washed over Alpha Marcus. It didn't burn his skin. It burned away his lies. It showed him every cruel act he had ever committed, every life he had ruined, every drop of pain he had inflicted. It forced him to feel the consequences of his ambition, the hollowness of his greed. It stripped away the snarling alpha, the proud warrior, the ruthless leader, until all that was left was a small, broken man. His wolf spirit shattered. He collapsed to the ground, not wounded, but utterly broken, sobbing like a child who had seen the face of God and been found wanting. The column of light receded, folding back into Nessa until she stood in the garden, trembling and exhausted, but whole. Thane, still in his wolf form, nudged her gently with his massive head, a low whine of concern in his throat. The remaining Blackwood wolves, their alpha broken, dropped their weapons and submitted, bowing their heads in surrender. The battle was over. In the quiet aftermath, the garden was a scene of devastation and awe. The bodies of the slain were removed, the surrendered wolves taken to the dungeons. Alpha Marcus, a babbling, empty shell, was stripped of his title and his lands, destined for a lifetime of exile in the northern wastes, where his broken spirit would be the only company he kept. The Stonecreek pack was officially disbanded, its members absorbed into other territories, a permanent lesson against the cruelty of casting out a miracle. Nessa, tended to by a weeping, grateful Kate and a stunned Iona, was declared a hero. But all she could feel was the steady, grounding presence of Thane, who had shifted back and now stood beside her, his hand never leaving the small of her back. Days later, once peace had been restored and the citadel had settled back into its rhythm, he led her back to the garden. It was already healing. The scorched stones were being overgrown by new, vibrant moss. The flowers seemed to bloom with an impossible brightness. Her power, her life force had saturated the very soil. He stopped her by the fountain, the same spot where he had confessed his fear. The moon was full, casting a luminous glow over them. The bond must be completed, he said, his voice quiet, serious. The marking. It will join us completely, mind and soul. There will be no more pain from separation, no more dreams. We will be one. He looked down at her, his golden eyes soft. But the legends are not law. This is not my right to take. It must be your choice, Nessa. I will live in the agony of the incomplete bond for the rest of my days if you do not wish it. She looked up at the king, who offered her a choice when he could have commanded. The Alpha, who had anchored her when she was burning. The man who had seen a queen in a beggar girl. The warmth that had been blooming in her chest was now a steady, radiant fire. I remember a life of being cold, she said softly, reaching up to touch his face. Of being empty. With you, I am not. I am whole. She smiled, a true, brilliant smile that made his breath catch. It is not a choice, Thane. It is an inevitability. She tilted her head, baring the pale, smooth skin of her neck and shoulder. An invitation, a surrender, an acceptance. With a reverent growl, he lowered his head, his fangs extended, and for a heartbeat, she felt a flicker of old fear. But then his lips brushed against her skin, a soft, reverent caress before the bite. When it came, it was not pain. It was a searing, ecstatic shock of pleasure and energy, a white-hot bolt of lightning that fused them together. The world exploded behind her eyes. She saw his first shift, a terrified boy lost in the woods. She felt his loneliness on the throne, the crushing weight of his crown. She felt the centuries of his bloodline, a long line of powerful wolves, all turning as one to look at her. Their voices a single thunderous chorus in her mind. Mate, queen, anchor. He felt her life, the cold rejection, the gnawing hunger, the quiet resilience. He felt the spark of her light, hidden and suppressed. He felt it awaken, and he felt her love for her friend, her fear for him, and finally, her acceptance of him. He felt the dawn of a new age in her soul. When he pulled back, the twin marks on her shoulder glowed with a soft, golden light before fading into her skin, a permanent brand upon her soul. They looked at each other, and there were no more secrets, no more doubts. He could feel her love for him, a warm, steady sun in his chest. She could feel his, a vast, protective ocean. Mine, he growled. But this time, it was not a possessive claim. It was a prayer of gratitude. Yours, she whispered, and sealed it with a kiss. 6 months later, Queen Nessa stood on the grand balcony of the citadel, Thane's arm wrapped securely around her waist. His hand rested on the slight swell of her stomach, where their twin children grew, one with the heart of a wolf, the other with the soul of the sun. The kingdom below was thriving. The lands were lush and vibrant. The packs were strong and united. The people prosperous and content. Her light, anchored by his strength, had healed the realm. She was no longer Nessa the broken, the wolfless outcast. She was the luminary queen, a legend reborn, the anchor to the Alpha King's soul. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "I have a kingdom at my feet," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer hid from her. "But it is nothing compared to the universe I found in you." She turned in his arms, her love for him a tangible, radiant force. "Every wolf in your bloodline was howling my name," she teased gently. "And I will spend an eternity answering their call," he vowed, sealing his promise with a kiss as the sun set over their peaceful, thriving kingdom, together, whole. Thank you so much for listening to this story on His Wolf Knew First. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe so you never miss a new tale. Drop a comment below telling me which moment moved you the most. Your support truly means the world to me, and I'll see you in the next story on His Wolf Knew First.